word picture for you. Think of a hamster, common garden hamster. And I'll ask you a question. From birth to sort of adolescence, hamsters double their body weight each week. How much do you think a hamster would weigh on its first birthday if instead of levelling off in maturity, it kept doubling its weight each week? Any guesses? Give me a figure, a number, anything. A ton. We have 1 ton. 1 ton. Do I have any answers on 1 ton? No, that's just cheating. The answer is 9 billion tons. If it kept eating at the same ratio of food to body weight, its consumption would be greater than the whole world's production of corn for a year. There is a reason why, in nature, things do not grow indefinitely. As in nature, so must it be with the economy. Now, you're designers, so one of the questions that will occur to you is, well, we can make things better, we can make things more efficient. Surely we can get around it that way. But Herman Daly again makes this point, that the notion that we can save the growth forever paradigm by dematerializing the economy or decoupling it from resources or substituting information for resources is fantasy. He says we can surely eat lower down the food chain, but we cannot eat recipes. Let's look at it another way. Again, these are not new debates. There was an economist in the 1960s, he was writing before even the famous Limits to Growth report was produced, who was offering a critique of economic growth, but he had many, many critics, as indeed people who dare to utter such heresies today. People said to him, what about the costs of not growing? And then they thought they always got him with this one. They said, what about the fact that raw materials haven't actually run out yet? Mishan responded thus: a man who falls from a 100-story building will survive the first 99 stories unscathed. Were he as sanguine as our technocrats, his confidence would grow with the number of stories he passed on his downward flight, and would be at a maximum just before his free fall abruptly halted. So Daly tells us that we must eventually conform to the same behavioural mode of development without growth. We have to ask, when is eventually, and how do we get it to conform? Well, by our calculation, using the ecological footprint, the Earth as a whole went into ecological debt on September the 25th, meaning that after that date, the world consumes and produces more waste than ecosystems can absorb and provide. If you wanted to look at the UK alone, well, we went into ecological debt back on April the 12th. That's a very conservative measure for lots of reasons to do with techie graphs that you saw earlier that I'm not going to go into right now. We've heard about peak oil. The consensus is that it's happening now, around now, and that is our food supply. Those are our transport systems we're talking about. We did another little calculation around this thing about when does it become more rather than less likely that we're going to go over this tipping threshold, this 2-degree temperature rise. On current trends, we've got, as of the 1st of October, 86 months to go before the level of greenhouse gas concentrations in the atmosphere, that takes us to the end of 2016, means it's no longer likely that we'll stay below 2 degrees. There's lots of conservative assumptions built into that. You know, there are things going on. There's been little tiny green stimulus packages to the economy to help us get through this. I can tell you that the green stimulus in the pre-budget report, something I'm sure you read line by line, was so substantial that it was at least 1/7 of the bonus package that was given to the executives of the Royal Bank of Scotland after they screwed up. And then when the full budget was announced, there was as much money thrown at getting more oil out of the North Sea and keeping cars on the road as there was given to other more positive measures to do with green transition. We've talked about the need for a Green New Deal, taking a cue from the last time the global economy fell apart in 1929, and Roosevelt stepped forward with his New Deal. And we think there's many, many ways in which we can begin a massive environmental transformation of the economy, which at the same time gives us more secure homes for our savings, more jobs for people, a wider range of jobs, more stable and resilient energy systems, transport systems, food systems. All these things you can download off the NEF website. But ultimately, we have to come to grips with the idea that our fundamental levels of consumption are way off the sustainable chart. But the good news is that there's a huge body of research into human behaviour and human psychology that tells us that we can radically reduce our levels of consumption without it having to undermine our sense of life satisfaction, our sense of well-being. In fact, because of the negative cost of being stuck on what they like to call the hedonic treadmill of get more, get better, there's a very good chance that we can radically reduce our consumption and come out of it much better. We did a huge survey across Europe, over 100,000 respondents. We found people with lifestyles ranging from 1 planet living right up to 8 planet living. But when you ask them about their levels of life satisfaction, there was no relationship whatsoever. You were just as likely to have a high level of life satisfaction at frugal 1 planet living as you were up at 8 planet living. The notion, the idea of the steady state, the stationary state, has been with us since Mill in the 18th century and back even further. In fact, here's a general knowledge question. I'll read you a short quote. See if you can guess the year in which it was said. What difference does it make how much is laid away in someone's safe, or how much capital he puts out at interest if he is always after what is another's and only counts what he has yet to get, never what he has already? You ask what is the proper limit to a person's wealth. First, having what is essential, and second, having what is enough. Who said that, and when? When do you think it was said? 19th century. Once again, any advances on the 19th century? Any advances on the 19th century? 17th century, 15th century, that's just cheeky, what are you doing, it's going backwards. Century at a time. Those are the words of Lucius Annaeus Seneca, 4 BC to AD 65. These fundamental human insights into the human condition have been trampled beneath the orthodoxy of a form of economics which is not evidence-based, but based on a series of ideological assertions which just so happen to line the nests of a minority of human society rather effectively. In 1997, just shortly after the Labour government came to power, there was a great announcement that came out of the Treasury. They said, from now on, our policy making is going to be evidence-based. What the fuck were you basing it on before? Ladies and gentlemen, I think you've heard just about enough of me. I think we actually know what needs to be done. We know that we need a better way of doing things. If you want just a kind of thumbnail sketch of the different economic system we need, because in critiquing orthodox economic theory, it's not saying that economics is entirely useless science, it's just that it's being co-opted, misdirected. Herman Daly summarised it by saying that what we need is a subtle and complex economics of maintenance, of qualitative improvements, of sharing, of frugality and adaptation to natural limits. It's an economics of better, not bigger. And if that isn't a design job I don't know what is. Good luck with it, and thank you for listening.